Pieces of the Afterplace, Volume 1, En route to the King's Retribution, translated to Before by Andrew C. Sleeve. Take 2. Henceforth, Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end. Wendy Darling, Peter Pan. The king was awake before I had time to finish the dream I found myself pleasantly in. He shook me violently out of it and insisted we jump that instant. To be sure, what he meant by the jumping bit was to exit the train as it was moving, and a rather fast train it was. But we jumped almost as soon as I awoke, and even as I was still picking 2 crusty sleepies from the corner of my eyes. "Why now?" I asked, though hardly surprised at the sudden change of scenery which, by now, had become a regular occurrence in my travels. "Because the steeple of skies is this way," he responded as he walked, somehow already perfectly balanced upon his feet. The king had been going on about the steeple of skies since I decided to join him on that train. Initially, the trip had been one of a sort of retribution to the place where the power plant was. But, luckily, I had convinced him otherwise. "There must be some other way," I had urged. "It wasn't all your fault, after all." For a while he persisted in his insistence, but finally he agreed. The only other way, it turned out, was an adventure, of course, to a place he called the Steeple of Skies. It did sound grand. "We'll leave early tomorrow morning," he had said. "That's when the train should be passing the closest, most reasonable path to the steeple." And so we agreed, though, to be sure, I was not fully prepared to wake up as early as we ultimately had. And now, here we were. Apparently, in my sleep, the train had begun to pass through a slightly less desert-like place. This place was more dirt than sand, and there were some pine trees scattered about, though sparsely to be sure. We walked for some time in silence, the king always much further ahead. By now the clanking sounds of the old train could be heard only faintly in the distance, and the tracks themselves were so far behind us that they were mostly out of sight, unless one chose to squint, which I did not. "Where are we going?" "I already told you, the Steeple of Skies." "Out here?" And just as I finished my question, the tip of what appeared to be a roof began to grow out of the horizon ahead. As we approached, the roof quickly grew into a multitude of logs, all piled one on top of another, until finally we stopped at the foot of an old wooden door, to which was attached the rest of a small log cabin. "Should we—" I began, but the king, without hesitating, turned the knob and pushed the door in. "Go in?" Maybe it was hopeless to inquire about anything. The inside of the cabin was nothing like what I had expected from outside. On the inside, the cabin appeared to be made of a grayish and worn marble tile. It was the kind of tile you'd expect to see on a master bath floor, the kind that, without proper heating, would feel like ice against your feet in the winter after stepping out of a cold bath. In front of us, there were 5 coffins. I counted in my head a couple times to be sure. 4 of them were painted black, 2 on either end. The middle one was painted white, and perhaps once had been a majestic sight to behold. But as they were with apparently no one to care for them, they were very clearly in an increasingly deteriorating state. Still, the white paint was different enough from the black of the coffins on either side, it seemed obvious that there was something special about the middle one. "You have the key?" the king asked, more stating it as a matter of fact. I rustled through my pockets and pulled out the key I had taken from the Cathedral of Clouds. "I do." No sooner had I held it out in front of me, the king snatched it to himself and moved closer to the white coffin. "I need answers. What is this place?" "There are bigger things here than you, photographer," was his only reply. I quickly snapped a shot of the coffins, remembering that I'd forgotten all this time to take any photos. I blamed it on my having just woken up. The king turned to me again. "I would, however, like to see that photo once it's printed," he said with a quick and awkward grin. I don't know how to print photos here. I haven't met any printmakers, I started. But the king was already back into his mode. I watched as he used the key to unlock a padlock on the white coffin, and I stepped back instinctively as he began to open it, half expecting to see a dead body. When he had the lid all the way up, revealing an empty, bodiless coffin, I breathed a sigh of relief and moved forward again. "You need to get into the coffin," he ordered. "What?" I was beginning to think I might have preferred the dead body. "It's the safest path to the steeple of skies. There are too many cameras out there." He gestured back to the door we had come through. "They watched us leave the tracks. They'll be sending someone back soon." "Have they always been watching?" "Yes, even you. But they don't care about you. They want me." "What about this place?" I stamped my foot, and a cloud of dust puffed up from the floorboards. "Wouldn't they already know where we're going?" "I built this cabin, 1 inch at a time. They couldn't possibly know what's on the inside." "But wouldn't they have watched you build it?" "No." I could see he was beginning to grow frustrated. For all I thought I knew about the king, it did seem like he was rather fussy when it came to things he actually cared about. Apparently, retribution was one of those things. "I mean, I literally built this place, 1 inch at a time. It's taken me a very long time to complete. Precisely 947 years precisely. More or less, to be exact." I inquired no further. The thought occurred that I might, after all, still be sleeping on that train. But the thought was extinguished and gone almost as soon as it came. Dream plots are as unfair as time loops, you see. We stood another moment in silence until the king impatiently gestured toward the coffin. Okay, but you are coming, no?" "Of course I am, unless you're guilty of something." I thought that one over, but decided it was futile. "Not so much as you, it appears." "Then lay down already and close yourself in. I will be right behind you, with the key, of course." My trust meter was running low, but I was already halfway into the coffin and decided that it would be more difficult to explain my way out. I have a terrible habit of not wanting to hurt people's feelings. I was hoping this habit wouldn't be my downfall, at least not today. I closed the coffin over myself and waited to embrace the darkness that would, in any other place, be expected. But instead there was whiteness. For a moment I swore that I was in that vision again, back at the cathedral, with the ladder extending up to the clouds. But before I could comprehend the thought, the whiteness went away, and I found myself surrounded by the softer light of a nearby candle. I was lying in an open coffin of a more traditionally wooden brown color. There were no marble walls here, but instead a plain white wall surrounding a room full of coffins. Indeed, this room looked more like a normal funeral parlor, except for the fact that I'd arrived by coffin. I climbed out of the coffin and began to pace around the room. All the other coffins seemed to be branded with a golden symbol of a language I couldn't decipher, though it seemed very similar to the Thai script I had encountered in my travels from before. Good. It worked. I really didn't think it would. A reassuring voice echoed from behind. I turned back to find the king climbing quickly out of the open coffin. "Is the steeple far?" "No, this is a small town. But don't be fooled by that. This is one of the oldest and most holy places I've heard of. Mr. Sleeve himself writes of it." "Who?" "Never mind. Was that candle lit when you arrived?" Before I had a chance to reply, the sound of footsteps came pattering in from outside the room. The king looked around the room, alarmed. "Find one that doesn't look to be in use," he whispered, and moved quickly toward one he had already been eyeing. My eyes darted fast about the coffins. They all looked exactly alike, and only the one seemed to be open. I heard the footsteps getting closer and began to panic, but every coffin I tried was locked tight. This one? No. That one? No. Here! And at last one of them budged. But my heart stopped very suddenly when my eyes fell upon the coffin's contents, for inside there was a full human skeleton. Well, a skeleton minus the head, assuming it once had one. The doorknob began to rattle as someone, or thing, began to fumble with it on the other side. Wasting no time, I fell into the coffin, onto the skeleton, and pulled the lid shut. Now it appeared I really was in darkness, though of course I could feel the cold bones beneath me pressing stiffly into my own, which, by the way, I could only hope would remain inside my skin. A voice sang out from somewhere outside the coffin, "Time on my hands, do-do-do-do. Time on my hands, do-do-do-do-do." I shifted ever so slightly within my tiny confines, intending to pull a bone from out of my neck. No such luck. "Time on my hands." The voice was louder now. Whoever it belonged to was clearly out of his mind. I lay as still as I could for a long time, listening to the man's song, which by now had evolved into a low hum. Eventually, being that it was so dry in the coffin, my throat began to crackle, and I clenched my teeth in panic, attempting somehow to stifle a cough that seemed to be scratching its way from within. The humming continued. The cough had begun to settle at the bottom of my throat. Being completely focused on stifling the cough, I suddenly became aware of a lack of oxygen in my lungs. I couldn't hold it any longer. Just as the cough escaped my throat, a bell somewhere suddenly sounded. Oh, service. All at once, the voice's song came to an abrupt end, and the sound of hurried footsteps pattered past my coffin. A door creaked and then slammed. There was silence. After a few more moments, I heard another creaking sound. The sound of footsteps came again, ending this time right outside my coffin. The lid of my coffin was suddenly opened, and I shifted to face upward, recognizing immediately the noble and solemn face of the king. "We need to go now." Leave your friend." I looked back to the skeleton, which, without a head, and therefore no face, still seemed somehow very sad. "You'll be fine." As I climbed out of the coffin, I asked, "But where's its head?" "There are crooked things in all places, photographer. Crooked people everywhere. But we have our own story to attend to right now. Take a picture if you must." I raised the little red camera to my face and took a picture, feeling guilty without a proper context. People are going to want to know where its head went. What people? You know, if I ever make it back to before. Are you quite certain you'll be going back there soon? I guess not for some time, seeing as if I still don't know how I got here. Then you'll have plenty of time to think of a story befitting your beheaded friend. I guessed he was right and patted my clothes free of the dust that had accumulated while inside the coffin. I took one more picture and followed the king out of the door. But I still can't think of a good reason why that headless skeleton should have been there. To be continued.